Okay. I think that I have fixed this. I can at least see that I have sound this time. Do other people hear that I have sound? I'm also going to... Where did my closed caption go? Okay. I see that there is someone watching. Can the someone watching tell me if they have sound now? I don't know. I don't know. Okay. I am just giving folks a minute. It's that kind of week. It's gonna be that kind of week. It fits. All right. So, we're gonna try this again. Hopefully with sound this time. I like that I went like a solid 30 minutes just believing that it was, some random errors here and there, and not that I completely had this wrong. I'm pretty impressed with myself. I think that there is a particular degree of like self-delusion that you need to have to be able to like be that confident. So I'm impressed with myself. I'm gonna go with impressed being, the word here that we use. I don't know why the captions aren't working. It looks as though they are like not at all working. They're not showing up in the tools on my end. I can see on the stream that they're not showing up there either. I will figure that out. I'm still getting used to OBS. I don't know what I'm doing. I think that's clear. I think it's very clear that I do not know what I'm doing and that I'm making this up as I go along. But that's how we learn, and it will get better. I will figure out where all of my captioning scripts went after I try doing this all over again. Hooray! How are people's weeks going? Are they going better than mine? I don't think that it takes a whole lot at this point for people's weeks to be going better than mine is. This is a time. I'm excited to be doing this, but it's a time. It's a time. I am going to fix the things on my end so that I see the things that I need to see where I need to see them without overloading my computer. That should be really useful. It is not happy with me. It says that I'm trying to do too many things all at once. Let's see. Was that what I'm hoping it was? Yes, it was. Excellent. Hooray. Okay, I found the thing. I did it. Go me. All right. So, Yeah, this week for me, how has it been? Not great. Uh, this has probably been a pretty good example of the kind of week that I've had, of the kind of like banging my head against a brick wall that it feels like I've been doing. But it hasn't been terrible. It's been like there's been a couple of cool things this week. Gaming went pretty well. I got past where I was stuck in Ni no Kuni, which was very exciting. I was stuck on one of the like super early bosses, the nightmare, and I was stuck there for a really long time. I really think that this boss must have killed me at least 20 times. And of course, in Ni no Kuni, like, it's really frustrating when you can't beat a boss because a lot of the time there's a save point and then there's like 3 to 5 minutes of dialogue, and then you get to the boss point, the boss battle, and there's no anything in between the like dialogue and the cutscene and the boss battle, so you can't skip it. So every time this monster, like this boss kills you, you have to sit through the whole thing again. And it's just like the cutscene before the nightmare is so long. So you're just sitting there being like, A, for forever until you actually get to the monster. So I was very, very happy that I don't have to do that again. Of course, now I'm stuck on the next one, which is the lava monster. Um, that one was annoying. Like, I'm still like he'll. I've only tried killing him once. I'm sure that I'll die a billion times. I'll eventually look and see like what is the way to kill him without dying. But the thing that annoyed me was the like there's a timed section before you get to the top of where this monster is, and the timer is super like it's not clear what is being timed and what is not being timed, because with Ni no Kuni, like it's a fighting game, so like there's monsters and they ambush you and they like spawn, and then they can attack you or you can attack them, but the attacks don't seem to count in the time, and they can still ambush you, and I just don't like the ambiguity. Like, I want to know what my time is for. I want it to be clear when my time starts, when my time stops, and it does not do that, and it makes me very frustrated. So, yeah, I want less ambiguity when games are like, you only have this amount of time to do the thing. I'm here for that. Also started playing The Wheel of the Cosmic Sisterhood, and I'm enjoying that so far. It was not what I expected it to be at all. Um, yeah, but it's been really cool so far. I'm not that far into it. Like, I have the 4 cards that you have just to like get started and get going. Um, and I'm curious where it's gonna go. Uh, we had couple more games that we were playing this week that we made progress on that I talked about when we had no sound. Um, I'm trying to remember. Like, it's been a weird week. I don't remember all that we were playing or all that I did. I'm like, did I? I feel like I finished a game this week, but I don't remember which one. I've been playing a lot of them because I've been pretty stuck in bed and there has not been that much else to do. But this weekend's been pretty fun. We went to a lot of garden stores, started planning the garden for this year, which I'm very excited about. We got these really cool, they're pink lemonade blueberries, and they're blueberries, but they're going to be pink. And I'm really curious about them. We saw them in the garden store yesterday. I've never seen them before. I've never heard anything about them. I think that they're super weird. Um, but I really like growing weird things in my garden. So I'm very excited about that. We also got like one of the biggest rhubarb starts that I have ever seen. Like, this is like not just, hey, this thing didn't sell last year and so it's available super early in the garden supply. Like, I feel like this thing's probably like 2 or 3 years old. It's got like a really thick like center stalk growing up the middle of it. I'm excited to get that in the garden and see how it does this year. Um, yeah, really excited that it's spring and it's nice out and I can be outside, which is so happy. Today, we are going to be talking about cyborgs, which is one of my favorite things to talk about. In the half hour that I was already rambling about them, it's become quite evident that an hour is not enough time to contain my cyborg joy. Before we jump into that, I'm trying to get into a habit of offering a visual description at the beginning of most of my streams. So, hi, I'm Shay. I'm a white human in my mid 30s. I have short, curly brown hair. It's blonde at the tips. It's a little bit unruly at the moment. I'm very much looking forward to getting it back under control soon. I am wearing a black tank top with a colorful binder underneath. It's in pride colors, so it's depending on where it's peeking out under my shirt. You can see little hints of different colors. This is kind of like the autism uniform. Usually, this is what I wear on a day-to-day basis. I'm sitting in front of a gray backdrop. You can see there's some wrinkles in it. I don't know, add some visual interest, I guess. It's a pretty boring background. Yeah, that's the image description for today. Not going to be showing any media or anything from my screen. As we can all tell, I can hardly keep this thing running. So we're not going to try for anything fancy yet. One day, when this is easy, we can try for something more substantial, but we are not there today. All right, so today we're talking about cyborgs, and it seemed like this was a really good place to actually talk about the profile picture, which is ESTER. ESTER is a very cool wheelchair tennis playing robot. They were programmed by a school in Georgia. I don't remember which one. The project is all open source, so there's like a whole GitHub page if you're interested in like the motion sensing that they used and how they programmed ESTER to like respond to like tennis ball serves and all of that. And like that is ESTER's function. ESTER is a robot that plays tennis with humans through their tennis wheelchair. And I think that it's great. I I feel like so much of the time when we see like robotic beings and like robotic entities, they're always based off of like particularly like humanoid form robotic entities. They're always based off of like a standing person. The other cyborg that I was talking about earlier was I think their name is Pepper, and Pepper is the like robot that they have in one of the hospitals here, and it's very like humanoid based. It's meant to like show you around the hospital, give you information about where you're going or like where basic departments are and things like that. You can also ask it to dance and it will dance with you. That's pretty cool. It does a robot dance, but it's always based off of a standing form. And so I think that that was like one of the best parts for me was like I was trying to set up the Twitch channel, and the Twitch like biography censorship wouldn't let me put the word disabled anywhere in the about this channel. And so I was like, what other words can I use to talk about disability that are not going to get censored out? And Cyborg did not get censored out. So then I did a Google search for a wheelchair using robot and came up with ESTER, which is very exciting. Um, yeah. And so like I was so excited. I was like, this is actually something real, that somebody made a robot that uses a wheelchair and thought that that was like the best way to solve the problems that they were having and figure out like the best way to approach the technological challenge of a robot that can move fast enough in space to respond to tennis balls being lobbed at it, and that the best solution for that was a wheelchair. And I think that that just like really goes to show how much like what am I trying to say here? Like how disconnected the idea of like disability and humanity can sometimes be. That it's this exception of like how if we wanted to search like humanoid form robots, that actually existed, that were actually like real and in the world, we would have no shortage of like real examples of humanoid form robots that pop up, even like animal form robots that pop up. I'm thinking about those, they're evil. Those evil security dog robot things that some horrible military people developed. I can't, they were like all over the internet a couple of years ago. You know, dogs. We can create dog shaped robots, but goodness forbid that we should have robots that are also disabled, and that can be of benefit to them and of like the use that they've been invented for. I think that that's super cool, and that we don't see that anywhere near often enough in like actual technology. So ESTER excites me very much as an exception to the exception to these like humanoid robots that we see everywhere. And I am very proud to have a little ESTER as the profile picture that we're using for this stream. Because if you're going to be censored about being disabled, you might as well embrace being a cyborg. I often call myself like a modern day cyborg, and I feel like to like situate this conversation, there's some pieces of that we maybe need to unpack a little bit about like what does it mean to be a cyborg? What does it mean when we talk about technology? And then like cyborgs as people with technologically mediated disabilities, which means then we also have to talk about what it means to have a technologically mediated disability. So we'll jump into that in a minute. I'm going to take a sip of my tea because it's really hard work talking to a screen. All right. So, to start off, in terms of like what cyborgs are, if you go back to like the 1980s, 1990s academic writings on like what does it mean to be a cyborg in postmodern post-humanism. There we go, that's the one. Post-humanism feminist writing. You'll find a very, very famous piece of literature called the Cyborg Manifesto that talks about cyborgs as, sort of like flesh melded with technology and left like very loose, talking about that like this definition of being a cyborg is that you are more than just composed of human parts, but less than entirely composed of technological parts. And that cyborgs exist in this realm that is neither fully human nor fully technological, but this like in between space where it's kind of messy as to like what exactly a cyborg is. And this was done really sort of like during that time when biohacking was like just starting to be a thing, where we were just starting to get some technology developed that was really about mediating disability. So, for example, insulin pumps, pacemakers, all of those things started to emerge during this era, and it created, like looking at it from like a hearing perspective of like hearing aids and cochlear implants and those kinds of things. All of that came out, like all of that was in about the same time period. And so there was a lot of academic writing at the time about like, is this the new frontier of humanity? People who are not fully machines and not fully human, but this new thing that we've never seen before, and we're going to call it a cyborg. And so for a lot of disabled people, particularly those like with technologically mediated disabilities, the language of being a cyborg feels really comfortable and really innate to our experience. For myself personally, actually, let's talk about technology first. So then when we talk about technology, what do we mean when we talk about technology? As we're talking about technology, that can really mean so many different things. When we talk about it, often we're thinking about, what is the technology that we're using to mediate this interaction right now? What are the chips and the screens and the computers and the audio technology and all of that that's needed. But technology can be so much more simple than that. Technology can refer to tools. Technology doesn't have to have anything to do with computers. Technology is really about an innovation or an invention that allows humans to do something either that wasn't possible before or more easily than they were previously able to do it. So, going back thousands and thousands of years ago, the development of the wheel was a significant technology. And putting things on wheels created technologies because suddenly you were, able to have a wheelbarrow and you could move that, you could move a significant weight from one area to another because it was on wheels and you could easily move it around. And that was a technology. So when we look at what does technologically mediated disabilities, that opens up this whole huge spectrum of what a technologically mediated disability is. Because anything that we have invented to support disability and bodily functions that are being replaced is a technologically mediated disability. And so, in my own case, and it ranges so dramatically from things that, are implanted into our bodies, injected into our bodies, ways that our bodies are permanently modified or altered, things that we wear on our bodies to augment them or support them, things that we may sit in or, use to ambulate. There we go. That's the word I'm looking for. I can figure it out in ASL, but not in English. Ambulate around are all technologies that relate to disabilities. And so, in some ways, too, not everyone who has their body mediated by technology will necessarily identify as disabled. And there's there's one example of this that I'll give, and then there's another one that'll come up a little bit later in the conversation. But as like an example, if you have someone who broke a bone and they require, a plate or a screw or something like that to put it back in, it's healed, the parts are still inside of them, but everything is sort of back and restored to its full functioning. They might identify as a cyborg, but they may not identify as disabled. And so there's this like little bit of like weird squishy space where you can be a cyborg but not necessarily disabled, but a lot of people who are cyborgs are disabled. And also too, like depending on how deeply you get into what does it mean to be a cyborg, you can find things like people who have had like RFID chips, installed in their hand so that they can, pay for stuff with like contactless payment, or their hand is their key to open their door, or things like that. Those people are cyborgs. They're not necessarily disabled. But disabled people are often cyborgs because a lot of the technology that is developed around disability to mediate disability kind of requires us to become cyborgs in order to have the functioning that people expect that we have. And this brings up so many different issues that we don't talk about them very often. And I think that they're fascinating. And I think that we absolutely need to talk about it more often. There's so many systems and things that we're starting to see happen in the technological world that are becoming increasingly relevant to disabled people. And we'll have the conversations either in like one context or the other, but we don't necessarily have that conversation together to recognize that it's actually the same issues that are underpinning both. And that if we're seeing something pop up in the technological space, we need to be kind of curious about what's going to happen in the disability space as well. As an example, there's a lot of the newer functions in cars now are starting to run on subscription services. And for example, I remember reading a story about someone who had canceled a subscription service for, I think it was a BMW, and eventually like they ended up getting like locked out of their car and their system because they hadn't paid the subscription for the subscription, but it wasn't like evident within the system that it was canceled, and they just disabled their car as like, you didn't pay for the subscription, your whole car is disabled now. And that's something that like these systems are increasingly capable of the doing, is just like being shut off with a switch, and being very like subscription based. And you can see parallel things happening within the world of cyborgs. To give like a really like concrete example, in North America, if you are diabetic and use a continuous glucose monitor, those are often something that runs on a subscription service. So a continuous glucose monitor is a injectable filament that typically stays in your body for, depending on the manufacturer of the system, anywhere between 7 days at the low end to 14 days at the long end, with each sort of manufacturer having different ones. There's also implantable ones. There's one called the Eversense, which is really weird. It gets implanted like once every 90 days and it stays in you, or I can't remember whether it's 3 or 6 months, but it gets injected in you. It's about like an inch long and it's like a little pod and it stays in you. But most of them are not that. Most of them are easily removable. They sit sort of subcutaneously, and they measure. There's one that the Libra often goes in people's upper arm. That's why I'm playing with my upper arm. And it's got a filament that measures the glucose level in your interstitial fluid. Your interstitial fluid is like the fluid that fills the space in between your cells. And so it says, oh yeah, there's this much glucose here, and it measures it every 5 minutes, and it transmits it to either your phone or your insulin pump. And it runs that measure that it takes through an algorithm to estimate what your blood sugar levels are. And it's a really super helpful tool for diabetics because it allows you not only to be able to see what your blood sugar is without poking yourself, which is the way that we had to do it before we had this technology, is you'd have to do a finger stick, squeeze the blood out, put the blood on a strip, wait for the machine to read it and tell you what it was. But you would only see like certain points in time. And so you wouldn't necessarily get a sense of like, well, I'm a little bit high right now, but it's coming down quickly. And so if I give myself more insulin now, I will, come on, brain. I will not be able to, or I'll just go low. I don't need more insulin right now. Whereas with the continuous glucose monitor, you can actually see the trends, you can see what's going on. And now they're done in a way where they're integrated with the insulin pumps themselves. And so the insulin pump itself will also start to make those decisions. And it'll say, oh, your blood sugar level is falling really fast. We're going to back off on how much insulin we give you, or your your blood sugar levels are going up really quickly. We're actually going to give you a little bit more insulin and see if we can get it to stabilize. And they're doing that, which is great. But what the problem is that essentially, particularly in the United States and in Canada as well, because we don't have consistent government coverage for them, essentially your body's on a subscription service. Having access to the information of what's going on in your body is something that you have to pay for. And in Canada, that's to the tune of about $400 a month, depending on what system you're on. Somewhere between $300 and $400 a month, which is absurd. And there are, situations where the government will pay for it and situations where the government won't. And it's hard to, it's really hard to try and create social policy around a particular disability issue when not everybody has equitable access to the same technology. Diabetes is not the same disease when you have a smart insulin pump with a CGM that takes some of that burden off of you versus when you're managing it with pen with pen needles and finger sticks. And you essentially create a paywall for how you're managing diabetes. And particularly, the same is true with so many different disability technologies, that there is a paywall for them that sometimes the government can eventually catch up and overcome, and sometimes the government just does not. To take another example, if you take hearing aids as like a comparator, the amount of financial assistance that you get for hearing aids from the government pretty much universally is quite low. In Ontario, it's, I think, 500. I'm trying to remember whether it's $500 per hearing aid or if it's $500 per pair of hearing aids. It might be per hearing aid, but that amount was set back in a time when the individual cost for a hearing aid was about $750. It was before the advent of digital hearing aids, where they were all analog. And like the cost sharing ratio in Ontario is meant to be the government pays for about 75% of the cost and you're on the hook for the other 25%. But when it comes to hearing aids, the cost of high-end hearing aids that can cope with like the demands of a modern day work environment, or to take out to a restaurant, or to go between, being able to listen to things on your phone versus listening out in the real world, they run about $2,500 or more a pop, like somewhere in the realm of $2,500 to $3,000 per hearing aid. And that's before you get into any additional FM technology, which the last time I had to get my FM system done was something along the lines of $6,000 or $7,000 for all of the pieces. It might have even been slightly more. It was absurd. It was so much money, I could not believe it. And there was no way that I would have ever been able to afford it myself if there wasn't funding for it through school. And in fact, I have not updated my FM system since I was last in school because it is so expensive to do that. And I think that that's like really in part one of the biggest concerns that I have around technologically mediated disabilities is how easily there's this whole subclass of disabilities that either are not recognized as disabilities, are downloaded to be like individual responsibilities, and then sort of become invisibilized as though like they don't even exist. I think that hearing aids are a really good example of that. You can't see that I'm wearing hearing aids. They're so small these days that you have to make like a concerted effort to show people that you're wearing hearing aids if you want people to know that. Now, a lot of them can even be controlled through an application on your phone, making it even more unobtrusive and also challenging in and of itself, too. Like, imagine, like, sitting in a classroom, and you have to pull out your phone to adjust your hearing aids, and then the teacher's going, "What are you doing? Why are you on your phone?" And it's like, to, like, actually be able to hear you. These days, too, now most of the Apple and Android phones have live transcribe. So if you're hard of hearing, you can pull out your phone and it will use the computer's microphone, or it'll use the phone's microphone, run it through a speech detection algorithm, and try and caption what's being said. And again, it makes it invisible that what's happening in that moment is a disability related accommodation, because it's happening seamlessly, it's happening in this integrated way where nobody gets to see it. And that becomes really like challenging for a lot of disabled people to mediate, because it's not clear to other people what is going on. You then have to choose to disclose in that moment. The costs associated with that also really get downloaded onto people. For example, there had to be, I'm trying to remember if it was like the CRTC who had to get involved and mandate it or how it came about. But there is, like, folks had to intervene, for example, to get cell phone companies to give deaf and hard of hearing people who don't use voice minutes a discount on their plans, so that they weren't paying for a service that they weren't using, and to offset the fact that the way that they have to communicate with people often comes with higher data costs. So if you're going through VRS phone calls, which is video remote interpreting, or video relay services. That's what the VRS stands for. But really, what they're talking about is remote interpreting for the purposes of phone calls. It's called video. It's called VRI which is video remote interpreting for just like random like, hey, we're all here together except the interpreter is on a screen and they're not here. That's video remote interpreting. VRS is for when they're mediating phone calls. And that's data intensive because you're using video data to make a phone call as opposed to using voice minutes. And so they had to create like what was an ethical and fair way for disabled people to get access to a discount on their phone bill for services that they weren't using. And so much of the time, the way that you access that is through calling your cell phone company. They don't actually think it through who they're applying, like who is actually applying for this and who is eligible for it. And they actually gatekeep it behind an entirely inaccessible system. Another example of where this happens, and I was a little bit shocked to find this out recently, was that I was listening to Statistics Canada presenting on the census disability data. And they were saying that for the purposes of the census disability data, they don't count visual disabilities that can be mediated by wearing glasses, which to me is bizarre because it kind of creates this like strange place of like people whose vision requires correction to drive are legally like there's laws specifically pertaining to the level of vision loss that they have. Like under the law, they are disabled. There are particular restrictions. Their licenses say on the back that you need to drive with glasses, and there's a little symbol there showing that there's a restriction on your license. And if somebody pulls you over and you're not wearing glasses, there are specific laws in that case that apply to your existence and your body that do not apply to other bodies and other people's existence, but they're not considered disabled for the purposes of counting statistics on disabled people, because we have managed to say, oh, well, it's a personal responsibility. Oh, this gets downloaded onto you. This is pretty invisible. This is between you and your optometrist and the people who make your glasses. And we as the government don't need to get involved. And so we don't even think that we need to count that as disabilities, despite the fact that glasses are very much a technology that was invented specifically to mediate a particular kind of disability. So we're horribly inconsistent in terms of what happens when we start to mediate our disabilities with technology. And in being able to like make it seem as though technology is the thing that solves everything. The number of people who think that, you know, just because someone has hearing aids or a cochlear implant, that it gives them perfect hearing and that they can access the world exactly how non-disabled people access the world, it just truly boggles my mind, because it's an entirely different system. And if you understand how the technology works, that's never an assumption that you would make, but people aren't talked through how the technology that they just assume fixes things actually works. So they don't take the time to learn this is what it's good for and this is what it's not good for. And also, that's also highly individual, right? Like there's blanket statements that we can make about particular forms of technology as well as people's individual experiences. And so there's like this interplay between technology, groups of people, and individuals that are challenging to navigate. I think that that's really true of hearing aids, where they amplify all the sound equally, and their algorithms to prioritize particular sounds or to prioritize particular directions of sounds or types of sounds are nowhere near as complex as what the human mind can do. And they can be like so intrusive. Recently I found out that my hearing had gotten a lot worse during the pandemic, and I didn't know. I just kind of assumed that it had been the same, and I didn't know. Went to the hearing doctor. Went to the, hold on, that's not the right actual. Went to my audiologist. There we go. Not a hearing doctor, an audiologist. Went to my audiologist, got my hearing tested. It was a lot worse than it had been in a while. And getting used to like putting hearing aids back in and actually being able to hear sound, like it's overwhelming because it's not the same as the way that natural ears hear sound. It doesn't work the same, particularly in like situations where there's sound coming at you from multiple directions. You can't localize sound the same way. Um, and it's the same too as like an insulin pump, right? Like, yes, we can replace the life sustaining function of you not producing insulin, but it's always something that you're going to have to think about. It's never as smart as you are. The one that I love is that my insulin pump, there's no way to sort of say, well, there are ways. It's just very complicated, and I don't like doing them. It's hard to tell, but it's hard to tell the insulin pump, hey, don't actually, like, I was low, I ate some sugar, I'm gonna temporarily go a little bit high, but if you freak out and give me too much insulin, we're going to end up right back here again. And I know that. And, everybody else knows that, come on, what am I trying to say? It's not everybody else. I'm getting distracted in my own sentences. Welcome to my brain. I know that that's what's going to happen if my insulin pump gives it to me. But the algorithm says there's blood sugar, it's going up rapidly. What we should do is give it a bunch of insulin to try and get on top of it and slow it down. And so technology requires a lot of work on the part of disabled people to manage it, to be on top of it, to make sure that it's behaving the way that it's meant to behave. There's also this assumption that the technology is always going to be there. Um, I'm trying to remember. It was a few months ago in Canada. Rogers had a like 8 hour service interruption that was pretty much nationwide, and it cost like millions, if not billions, of dollars that day across like the country because the communication systems couldn't talk to each other, and transaction networks were down and all of that. And brain, come on, we can do this. And like that's just internet, right? If you're technological, like there are assistive technologies that require internet to function. Example, like the text to speech thing, or speech to text thing that I was talking about with the AI, or with the, not AI, with the auto captioning software and speech recognition software requires the internet to run that through speech detection algorithms. Um, and what else? Like, oh, a lot of stuff for blind and low vision folks runs through the internet. There's a lot of like character recognition stuff to be able to read what's written on boxes or on labels. There's a lot of stuff to try and identify pictures. That's a technology that's emerging and is sort of in its infancy and like its first few years, um, that's going on right now, and stuff like that. So like there's a whole class of disabled people who that day couldn't manage like basic functions because they didn't have access to the internet. And then taking into account like the timelines for repair for some of the technology that disabled people use, like as a manual wheelchair user, I'm sitting here. Actually, I'm using my dance wheels right now because my regular everyday wheels that have the better push rims for my hands, the I blew a tire a couple of weeks ago, and went to go repair the tube because that's a pretty easy fix, and found out that the explosion was so substantial that not only did I blow my tube, I actually blew my rubber too, and I need a whole new tire. And I haven't like, and that's a simple like that's honestly like one of the simplest things that could go wrong in a manual wheelchair, and I still haven't had time to go to the shop and get new wheels put on my chair. And it's been a couple of weeks now. It'll still probably be like another 3 or 4 weeks, and till I get there. And I'm happy that I have a backup pair of wheels that lets me do that. Um, it makes that really easy for me. But, there have been times where that's my hearing aids and they're gone for 6 weeks. And people often will look at, me and the way that I speak and the way that I interact with them, and they'll be like, Shay, why are you using ASL interpreters in in this setting? And it's always because having humans there to solve human problems rather than relying on technology is so much more flexible and so much more able to adapt to the unpredictability of the moment, as opposed to technology, which is very like rigid and on rails, and you can only interact with it in particular ways. Um, so it's really hard because people look at this technology and they look at what it can do for people, and people think that this is great and that this is something that we should really be promoting, that we should, throw everything that we have into this technology as a way of managing disabilities. But it's not perfect, it's not foolproof. But they forget to plan for what happens as a backup when it's out. Probably the most obvious example of that as a wheelchair user is lifts. Um, whew, Depending on where you are in the world, sometimes called platform lifts, sometimes called wheelchair lifts. But those little elevators that are not really elevators and are very specifically designed for wheelchair users. Uh, a lot of the time they're used in places where there's not a full story difference between the main level and the rest of whatever. Like they're used in stores, they're used in public places, they're used in buildings, like they're everywhere. Chances are good you've walked by probably a half dozen of them in the last week and haven't even realized that they were there. They just kind of blend in. Um, but they're often made from forklifts, essentially. Like they're repurposed forklifts for the most part. They got the same accordion style up and down, and they're not particularly durable. And there's a lot of places where people install them because they are compact and they seem like they're going to be a really good solution to a problem. And they're a terrible solution because they break all the time. And there's never a backup plan for what to do if they break. There's never usually redundancy built in. Um, there's never usually an alternate pathway. It's like if it's not working, you just cannot access what you're trying to access. And because people are like, we're accessible, but we're accessible via a lift, they don't, they're just like, that's it. We're accessible. It's a lift. Great. Great. Um, and they don't think about anything else. They don't think about emergency evacuation plans where you're not supposed to use the lifts or elevators. They don't think about what's going to happen if the lift is broken. Heck, they don't even do that for elevators in buildings. I've had people who I know who have been stuck in their buildings for weeks at a time because all of the elevators in their building are down. It's a really common thing, especially in major snow or ice storms or in older buildings where one elevator is already down and then the second one is only sometimes functional. Um, it's quite common that folks will end up stuck for long periods of time. And when apart, this is the thing, right? We don't think about what is the process of repair. The process of repair for a lift is often weeks. If they have to get a part in from out of stock, especially over the last few years where there have been more and more supply chain issues, um, if a lift goes down, it's often down for 4 to 6 weeks. And it's not just a single 24-hour backup contingency plan is needed. It's consistent contingency for weeks. Uh, that's never a part of what people view. And it bothers me a lot that we don't view technological breakdowns as a natural and expected part of disability. that we just need to be prepared for on a day-to-day basis. So many times, like, I'll say to people something like, well, what's the plan if the lift's broken? And people will look at me and they'll laugh and they'll just be like, well, let's just hope that it isn't. And I'm like, that's that's not an actual plan. Hoping that the predictable failure doesn't occur, it's not a plan. It's a wish. It's a wish. And I think that we can do better than just wishing that something's going to work. I think that there's more that's within our control within this world than just wishing that technology is going to cooperate. Like, I feel like that's like the one constant. Like, I'm the kid of a software engineer, and I feel like the like one thing that that has taught me more than anything is that you always have to be prepared for when the technology fails. Like, yes, I am a disabled person. Yes, some of my light switches are smart. Do they also click on and off? Oh, you bet they do. Um, because we just know. We know there'll be a blackout. Well, I mean, if there's a blackout, then it doesn't really matter. But because they're wired into the internet. Hey, if Rogers goes down again, how am I going to control my lights? That's important. We need to remember these things. We need to not forget about that. Um, we are almost at the time, so I feel like I should pick one more point and explain that. There were so many more things that I could say. I'm trying to narrow it down, and it's hard. Before I was talking on when there was no audio, I was talking a little bit too about the approval process for different technologies and how the approval process for uh, technologies that often mediate disabilities is really different from bringing consumer marketplace technologies to the market, and that there's really different testing processes and really different approvals processes. And I think that, like, this isn't to say that that is by default bad. I think that it's really important. I think that, for example, there are just so many possibilities within disability that we do need to account for when we're looking at disability mediated like technologies that mediate disability. For example, if you have a dementia patient person, let's use some not clinical technology here. For example, if there's a person with dementia who's also a type 1 diabetic and they are known for not being able to manage complex interactions with their insulin pump, there needs to be a way to lock that system. Or even like a young child who's on an insulin pump. It's important to have ways of controlling those systems and make sure that people can't inadvertently harm themselves. And we need to make it difficult for people to harm themselves with their medical technology if there is a easy way of doing so. There's a reason why insulin pumps have, maximum doses that they'll deliver at once, or maximum amounts of insulin that they'll give you per day before they check in on you, or a maximum amount of time that you can go without touching it before it says, hey, are you still alive? We just need to check in and push a few buttons here. Show us that you're still conscious and functioning. And I think that that's important, but I also think that it means that it can take a lot longer for people to have access to the technologies that they need to live successful lives, particularly because that approval process is not intertwined with a funding process. Particularly in Canada, Health Canada approves medical devices, but Health Canada doesn't dictate whether or not like the provinces have to cover it, and that's an entirely separate process with an entirely different set of rules, an entirely different way of going about it, or doesn't mandate that private insurers will cover it, and people often have to fight to have private insurers cover things. And this is particularly true for newer and emergent technologies. So, for example, when continuous glucose monitors first came out, almost nobody covered them. But now, a decade later, now that we have all of this information, and now that they're really like information on how they actually save money by helping people with diabetes actually manage their diabetes better, now governments are doing so much more to cover those devices now that they have the data. But people used to write, like, there's still provinces where they're petitioning to get continuous glucose monitor coverage. Uh, and then we've got some comments in the chat. Oh, FADP, ambulatory wheelchair user, can't possibly need a wheelchair if you have a couple of steps in and out of your home. Yep. I mean, we haven't even touched on the intricacies of funding models and all of the ways that they look for reasons to deny you and all of the like circumstances under which they'll deny you. In Ontario, there's an absolutely beautiful chicken and egg game around mobility devices of if you need publicly provided accessible housing and you need public resources to buy a mobility device, you get caught in a loop where you can't get on the housing waiting list until you have a device, and you can't get a device until you have accessible housing. And so you get stuck in this loop of like grinding around in the system until you finally pay for one or the other out of your own pocket. Generally, the mobility device, because it's usually cheaper than the housing, particularly on an ongoing basis. But like these are in systems that are supposed to work and provide people with access to the technologies that they need to function in a day-to-day life, we're really adamant about making sure that the systems don't work and that people don't actually have access to the technologies that they use. And it really like creates so much of a even greater financial divide within the disability community, particularly like when you start getting into, it's a not insubstantial portion of people who have multiple disabilities. Like sitting here as a multiply disabled person with, I don't even know how many, I wouldn't even know where to start counting how many disabilities I have. I wouldn't want to. But like, you can just see how financially that ends up penalizing more complexly disabled people who have lesser access to resources, who are more differentially less likely to have access to private insurance. Oftentimes, I mean, I haven't done the sociological studies on this, but like my experience is that the more complexly disabled you are, the less likely you are to have financial support from your family or familial support. Particularly if you are someone whose disabilities are not developmentally, like you can be neurodivergent, but if you weren't like identified as having like a gross global developmental delay, whereby most families generally don't financially cut off those dependents, many more complexly disabled people who families don't believe are as disabled or require as much support as they do often cut people out of their families, which is wonderful. I know that that's not a universal story, but certainly like among the folks that I've worked with and lived amongst for many years, that's a exceptionally common story. And so it becomes really complicated. And then people like, especially with like then people think that they understand how technology works or who it's good for or in what circumstances it's good for, and then it becomes like a judgment on you that you don't have access to technology that's out of your price range or that you don't have the financial support to access. Yeah, it's a thing. Technology, cyborgs, we want to have joy. And it's hard and complicated because living a technologically mediated life as a flesh human is really complicated. And we don't do enough to protect like what that actually means. I think that's kind of what it comes down to. There's certainly more like really cool, fun cyborg stuff and like all of the innovation stuff too. We haven't talked about innovation yet. That'll be another time when we talk about what is cyborg joy and the way that cyborgs innovate and give us new definitions of what it means to be human. And that's like something super exciting, but we can't talk about that until we really have like a strong foundation in like cyborgism is wonderful. and terrible and so intertwined with capitalism in ways that we really need to contend with, and neoliberalism, and the constant downloading of disability as a personal responsibility, as opposed to like just something that exists in our world, that we need to make a world that acknowledges and understands and makes space for. Yep. All right. Well, I think I'm pretty out of, definitely not out of things to say, but after, having to try and contend with this twice and all of those glitches, I think I'm pretty spent for now. So, thank you for spending a portion of your Sunday or whatever day you have decided to absorb this content with me. It makes me very happy. Thank you for chatting and thank you for tuning in. And I don't know if I'll be back on Wednesday night. I'm going to try. We'll see. So maybe stay tuned on social media because there will be more at another time. All right. Take care, everyone. Bye bye.